I love the bold design of African wax fabrics, but I'll be honest, I'm never quite sure how to use them or if there's traditions or cultural significance to certain symbols that I should be aware of. Today's guest, Miriam Galadima-Benson, is the face behind Quilt Africa Fabrics and the Quilt Africa Summit, held every July. She is sharing everything you need to know about these beautiful prints and where to find them. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea, and here's my interview with Miriam Galadima-Benson. Welcome, Miriam, to the show. I'm so glad you were able to join us. Where in the world are you coming to us from?
I'm right now in Abuja, the capital city of Nigeria in West Africa.
Now, are you originally from the capital?
No, I'm from Gombe State. That's further to the north, the northeast specifically of Nigeria. My dad was working, so he moved over, and then we just found a new place to stay in Abuja.
And when did you come to quilting?
So sometime in 2016, I got curious about the quilts I saw on Pinterest. And I kept reading and kept looking at all the photos, and I was just drawn to it. And so I started this journey of trying to create my first quilt, which was a 9-patch. So that was how I got into it. And after several months of starting and stopping, getting frustrated, I finally ended up with a 9-patch quilt. It's still alive at home right now. That was in 2016.
Is there a lot of quilting that happens in Nigeria?
Actually, no, not the modern quilting as we know it now. The traditional quilting, more patchwork and embroidery. That's the strength in Nigeria traditionally. But quilting, as you know it, with piecing and either free arm or hand quilting or long arm quilting, it's not done. Let me put it that way. Modern quilting is not done in Nigeria. And most of Black Africa, I would say.
Well, I'm always surprised when I find people that quilt in hot countries because I associate a quilt with warmth. But then I'm also, a lot of times I don't realize how cold it can get when you go up in elevation. That's it.
Yes.
So There are places that are chilly.
Yes, there are. I still think that the thickness of the quilt that you're used to, we don't use that there. So the secret is a lighter batting or no batting at all. That's the best way to enjoy a quilt over here.
Do you have a history of dressmaking or just tailoring in your family?
Yes, my mom was a dressmaker. So when we were young, she got my sister and I sewing machines, and then she would try to get us to make pillowcases and bed sheets, which at that time we were not interested, but we grew up seeing her bring out her sewing machine and sewing. And I wouldn't say she had a love of fabrics, but she was definitely into dressmaking. But she also had a side business of selling fabrics. So that was where I got my introduction to fabrics and to sewing as well.
I went down a rabbit hole of finding out about African wax prints a number of years ago. And I was surprised, one, that they were not made in Africa. A lot of them come from Holland. And I think a lot of them still come from Holland, don't they?
Well, the truth is, in the past, say, 20 years, the focus has shifted from the Dutch prints to prints being made, the wax print being made all over. In Asia, in some parts of Africa, the monopoly, I would say, has shifted from the Dutch, from Holland, to everywhere now. It's like anyone who can does.
And have you seen a switch in the type of patterns and the fabrics that are coming now?
Absolutely. When the Dutch started making the wax prints, they were so conscious and they kept it close to the traditions of Africa in terms of the patterns, in terms of the symbols, that were incorporated into the fabrics. But like I said, in the past 20 years, there's been a shift from the really traditional patterns, even the non-cultural ones that the Dutch wax is famous for. And so now you have more modern patterns that are coming up, like totally untraditional, unconventional for the African setting. So yes, there has been a tremendous shift, but still the vintage ones, the heritage ones, as I like to call them, they still are very popular because they had names that were associated with cultural things, or contemporary events or situations that were happening at that time, whether the elections, there's some about the coronation of Queen Elizabeth. And you may have heard that there's one about the Barack Obama became president, it became popular in Kenya. So you still have those old patterns, but they are more sought after and sometimes a little bit more expensive.
Now, you have developed a whole community to teach quilters how to use beautiful African fabrics. When did that start?
Yes. After my first quilt in 2016, I was so excited. I fell down the same rabbit hole you went into and discovered that there were Facebook groups that all they did was talk about quilting. I was so excited. So I joined a few and I started saying, hey, I'm from Africa. We don't quilt, but I made a 9-patch quilt. Look at it. It's so amazing. And I used the fabrics from my markets, and as quilters are so generous, they welcomed me, told me it was the most beautiful thing they'd ever seen. After that, people kept asking me, your fabrics are so unusual. Where are you getting them from? And I didn't see the big deal because, they're in every corner, where I am. And so they started requesting for it. Oh, we would love some of that fabric. We would love some of that fabric. It's so vibrant. It's so bold. It's so this, it's so that. And so I made some quilting friends who said, you really should put this out there in the market. And I said, really, you think it will work? They said, yeah, I think it's going to work. And so that was how I started. In 2017, I went ahead and I just hopped online and started saying, yeah, this is where you can get African fabrics from me in Nigeria here. And so that started my journey.
Near me, I have a beautiful shop full of African wax prints, but I have to buy them in 5-meter bundles. You offer pre-cuts, don't you?
Yes, yes. So honestly, when I got into quilting, everything about quilting, I just fell in love with it. It was so fascinating for me. It was like stepping into another world. And I love the idea of buying like really expensive 5-meter cuts, 5 yards, 6 yards, actually. They come in 12-yard bundles and then they get pre-cut into 6 yards each. So you can actually get them in 12-yard bundles. I was so fascinated that you could take a whole 6 yards and then you start cutting it into pieces. And so my focus was to make it accessible. The more I learned about the quilting industry and how quilters used fabrics, the more I was determined to make it as easy for them to access it in a way that made sense for them. I also found out that a lot of people were not into African fabrics. So the best way was to make it in tiny cuts. And so you're not overwhelmed by 5 yards, because it makes sense for us to have it in 6 yards because it's strictly dedicated to dressmaking. So you need all of that yardage, but not for quilting. I discovered that there were no quilting companies, no quilting businesses, that offered the fabrics in pre-cut. And so that was my focus.
African wax prints, I find they're a little bit thicker. The fabric is a little bit thicker than regular quilting cotton. Do you modify how you use it, or do you offer any advice of how to use it?
Yeah, so I think that is why the community has thrived, because we try to take the fabrics as they are and try to see how we can modify them into using into the quilting patterns that we create. So one of the ways we do that is to definitely let people know that, hey, it's thicker. It's a thicker cut of fabric. And if you have it less thick, then it's probably not very good. You do have those that are not as thick as the 100% cotton ones. So all of that is education, because people come down to Africa and they order online from other places. And so that's one of the first things I ask them to look out for. If it's thick, it's good. If it's thick, chances are it's good. It's 100% cotton. It's tightly woven. Another thing we do is I try to let people know to pair them with the solids that are used here. Because if you pair them with the regular quilting solids, it tends to pull because it's heavier than, so it wears out in a different way. But essentially, it works, the fabrics work just as they are. You can get away with using it with other types of fabrics, just depending on the proportion. There's no real special way when it comes to the weight. There's no real special way, but you just have to be a little bit careful about how it's used.
Can you tell me a little bit about the quilt that's behind you?
Yes. So one of the things we do in our community, in the tribe, we host regular group projects. And so this one was our African Christmas quilt. So here I am just looking at all the beautiful patterns that are out there, thinking we should do something about an African Christmas, and then this pattern, Joy pattern by Kate Spain, just jumps at me. Looking at how she did it and how she talked about the pattern, it just resonated with me. Because in Africa, we don't go by the red and green colors of Christmas. Christmas is more about the getting together and not so much about the symbols, that make up Christmas. And I'm like, yes, this is what Christmas means to me. It just means the joy of the season, the joy of family, the joy of getting together. And so I said, hey guys, Tribers, we're going to create this quilt for our last project for the year. That was in 2023. And it came out so amazing. The response to it was fantastic. Even people in our community who are not keen on traditional piecing, they went for it and it just turned out beautifully. And Kate has just been so gracious, she was gracious to allow us to use the pattern. And I think it's one of the best projects, that we've done as a community.
So on top of your fabric store in the community that you've created, you have an international summit that you do every year. Is it the same time every year in July?
Yes, it's the same time in July. We just decided to keep it simple, not to hop it around. Just stick to the second week of July every year so people know that we're there. Definitely this year it's going to be July 11th to 13th, just 3 days. But it's packed with a lot of speakers, and a lot of events where we just get together and it's all about African fabrics. It's all about the use. It's all about just inspiring people who are either used to it or not so used to it. Just come and give it a try.
So it's online?
It's online. It's an online summit because, well, I'm here in Abuja. I haven't left yet. And so we have speakers usually from all over the place. So definitely online. Everyone participates from the comfort of their homes, and we just get on at different times, according to our schedule, and then people just work along or listen, and all of that.
Do you have a combination of lectures and workshops?
Yes, we have hands-on workshops. And sometimes we also have hosts who are not used to the fabrics. So they consent to be on the summit and then they receive a packet. And once they receive the packet, they have to find their way through, because the idea of the summit is we want people to get an honest idea of what it means. And for the past 5 years that we've hosted the summit, this is our 5th summit, every speaker comes with something different. Everyone who has worked with it comes away with something totally different. And so that enriches us. And that just kind of broadens the bandwidth of our creativity to say, look, there's no limits with this fabric. You might not be used to it, but there's really no limits to what you can do with it.
You have a number of lecturers that have actually been on this podcast before. I know Kenna Tangi Dorsey, she was here a couple of years ago, and I remember her being so excited about working with you.
Yeah, she was amazing. She was our spotlight speaker.
She
had a series of classes. I know, so much energy. She really blew it out of the park. She introduced us to so many of her techniques, so many tips, so many tricks. And I think, the reviews, and the projects that came out of her sessions are just amazing. And they still keep coming out because people kind of don't do it right then. They revisit it because our recordings are available, and it's just amazing.
So if people want to get involved in the summit, how do they do that?
Well, we do take suggestions for speakers. We look around, we shop around to see who has a style, or is open to doing something new. A lot of the times our members, the community, they suggest to us, we would really love this person has a fantastic style and we want to see what it looks like in the fabrics. Or this person has dabbled a bit. We want to see how they did what they did. So we really don't have a set way because we're trying to kind of serve the needs of our community, So we're open to suggestions. You have people write in to say, hey, we've seen this summit, we want to be a part of it, and that's fine. And sometimes we look out to see what's interesting, who can work with us, who has something that we want to translate into African fabrics, and then we reach out to them to see if they're open, their schedule permits them to work with us.
So is this your 5th year?
This is the 5th year. Well, this is the 5th summit. Yes, if you count your end limits in, this is the 5th. We started in 2020, during COVID, 2020. So this is 2024. So 2020, 21, 22, 23, and then 24.
So what have you learned about running this event? It must be a colossal amount of work.
It is a lot of work, but the first thing I would say is it's possible. So when I first started, I wasn't much of a quilter. I didn't much know anything about anything. You know, I just had the desire and the passion to say, look, I went through so much learning to quilt. I really want to create an opportunity for other people. So there must be someone like me sitting down, looking at the fabrics and wondering what to do with it. You know, so I think that drove me so much that I overcame a lot of the obstacles. So I'm now really tech savvy, and I do not like technology, but I'm really tech savvy. So that's one thing I have learned from running the summit. And I've learned what a big heart quilters generally have. You know, from the speakers to the people who attend, they've just been amazing. You talked about Kina, her energy, her just desire to serve and make sure that the participants, you know, get what they came for. Yeah, and I've also learned that there's really no limits to using the fabrics. There's no need to be afraid of the fabrics, of the colors, of the patterns. You know, you just dig in and you can create whatever you set your mind to.
Well, I know there's a real fear for some people that it might be cultural misappropriation. And I remember Kina saying, no, use them, enjoy them. That's not something you need to worry about.
No, it's not, because like you said, it's not even African. I don't want to say that so loud, but it's not even African. So if it's not African, I don't really have any right to be propriety about it. So yes, it's not African, but it's embraced by Africans. It's loved by Africans. It's the African identity. I would say that about the wax prints. Now, when it comes to the more indigenous fabrics, there might be some cause for caution, but I wouldn't even say appropriation. Because when it comes to the cultural side of things, you have to be careful. There are rules that guide the use of certain things, certain colors, certain patterns. I mean, not using them in certain ways or at certain times. Wherever you find yourself in that environment, you have to find out, I think it's your duty to find out what goes with the more indigenous fabrics. And I'm talking about the mud cloth. I'm talking about the African batiks. I'm talking about the kente, the ashoke, the akwete. You know, there's so many of them. So you're duty bound to find out, is it okay for me as a woman possibly to wear red in this sort of fabric? So there are rules that guide things like that. But for the African fabrics, I call them the lingua franca of Africa. When it comes to textile, that's the lingua franca, because it's not ours, but we've adopted it, and it's the language that speaks. When you travel out of your country, out of the continent, and you go somewhere and you see someone wearing the wax print, you're like, hey, you know, you speak to them because it's a form of identity, you know. But possibly if they were wearing their cultural item, you wouldn't recognize it. But with the African wax print, you can recognize it. So I always tell my community that, look, the African way is really welcoming. I, as a Tangali person from the northeast of Nigeria, I would be so proud and so excited to see someone from another tribe wearing my traditional items, because you can't steal my culture from me. And I always tell them, you can't out-African me. You really can't. So it's okay for me to allow someone else who enjoys it, who sees what I see in my culture, you know, to enjoy it and be a part of it. The only thing, of course, is there are situations where maybe someone wants to take advantage, but I think generally people just come to the fabrics because they like the vibrancy and they like the beauty of it, and the difference, the uniqueness of it is still new in the quilting industry when you compare it to Japanese fabrics or the Indonesian batiks or the regular quilting cotton. It's still new and people are excited. They want to know about it. And so that's really what we try to do with the summit and all the other events that we host. Make it available, tell you it's okay, and then lead in showing everyone how to use it.
So with these beautiful fabrics, I see a lot of young people designing clothing around these fabrics. Are you finding there are designers, like new designers, designing patterns for fabrics?
Unfortunately, I would say that the wax print scenario is still a bit muddled. There isn't much regulation. There isn't much of anything, no structure. So if you can kind of afford it, you have the interest and you can afford it, you just jump in. It's still a closed thing. It's not open. So you must have come from a background of being involved in it to continue in it. Right now, I see young people, young Nigerians making it a business in the sense that because of the poor infrastructure we have in Africa, they either hire a designer or they design it themselves. But most times I think they hire designers and then they outsource them to other countries and have them produced and then they're brought back. Because the infrastructure, generally the infrastructure around Africa can't support that production. So anyone with an interest to design usually takes it out. And so that's why you find a lot of copyright issues with the Dutch wax, because it's an open game. Anyone who feels they can, jumps in and goes for it.
Well, when I was able to visit my local store here, and it was interesting talking with him and discovering all the different manufacturers, but then they've all kind of been caught and bought. So I think there's only like 2 players left in the game.
Well, that's if you're talking of those who are in Africa.
I'm talking about the ones in Holland.
Oh, the ones, yes. Well, the Dutch has become less popular than it used to be.
Okay.
It's less popular because one of the cost barrier. The Dutch wax became so expensive here in Africa that a lot of people couldn't afford it. Okay. So now if you're talking about the original Dutch wax, it's really out of the price point of the average African. And so what they did was they came into Africa and established mills and they produced the lower end brand. They created lower end brands that target the lower end customer. And even then, right now, anything by either the Velisco Dutch in Holland or its subsidiaries in Africa is still a little higher than what you find from other sources. And I think because of that, their market share in Western Africa, because we're the largest users, Nigeria is the largest user, Western Africa is the largest user compared to other regions, their market share in Africa has really dropped because the price point is now getting out of the reach of the average African. Because there are no indigenous textile African wax mills anymore. They're not owned by Africans. They may be in Africa, but they're not owned by Africans. So they only employ Africans. So it's like I said, if you're looking at it from the point of structure, yes, then you give it to the Dutch. The Dutch companies are structured, they are more popular, they are used by international designers. But if you're looking at local consumption in the African countries, then it's definitely those that are sourced from elsewhere, produced and brought in from elsewhere.
So do you do any traveling to deal with your business or with your summit?
Most of my travel is involved around sourcing my fabrics. But for right now, I'm like 100% online when it comes to Quilt Africa, when it comes to the summit, when it comes to the shipping of the fabrics. I just put up my systems and my processes and I'm able to source and process and then ship out to the customers all over. Everything it's really online. And I think that is, that's a unique point for us. I mean, I've literally never had physical contact with anything quilting. Anything quilting, never entered into a quilting shop, never sat in a in-person quilting class. Everything has just been virtual. And I think that's the unique point for us. We just break down those barriers. I get excited because we now have people within Africa who are also in the community, and that's just so amazing. That's the gift that the internet has given us. And I think that's the gift. It's difficult to see anything good about COVID, but I think what that COVID period, lockdown period did for Quilt Africa was that people were antsy, people were looking for things to do, and so it was easy for them to just key in and say, hey, look, yeah, I can try something new. So right now I don't do any traveling. It's in the cards for me. I've received some invitations from certain guilds and shows, and a lot of pressure from the people in the community. Miriam, you have to leave. But I have young kids and I think the business still stands to grow a little more before I begin to venture out, but it's definitely in the works for that. Another thing we're trying to do is see how we can bring people down into Nigeria as well, so they can experience the culture, not only of the wax prints in the markets, but also in the indigenous communities where they create fabrics as well.
I would be very interested in that.
Yes.
At QuiltCon, that's run by the Modern Quilt Guild, not this year, but the year before, there was a Nigerian artist that had a beautiful piece of work.
I think you were referring to Uzoma. He was our guest in the 2022 summit as well. I just saw him, and we're not in the same state, but I reached out to him and he was gracious enough to, he responded, and we just started that working relationship. And I think and he's really gifted, so talented, with the ease with which he just creates his collages. And so he taught at the summit, and then he had a follow-up workshop afterwards, and people were just drawn to him. He made it seem easy. There were no rules. He kept saying, follow your heart. And everyone is like, what does he mean by that? But I think eventually we got a hang of it. We followed our heart, and everyone who attended both his classes came away with like something they were really proud of. I think right now he's at the foremost of textile artists from Nigeria, and I think even Africa, who are connected to the quilting industry, to the international quilting industry. We do have quite a few of them, but they treat their collages as art, and so I'm hoping that with starting with Uzoma and some other young artists, I can let them know that, hey, there's a wider world. It doesn't have to be strictly fine art, the way you're thinking it. You could connect it to quilting, and the possibilities are endless.
Do any of your children quilt with you?
Yes, everyone quilts. My son loves the Aqua Quilt Cutter. He loves it. So I set it up for him, and we have the one that rolls. So he goes on and on and on. My daughters, both of them, the first one has started on the sewing machine. So she's gradually getting in there. But every time I have collages, we work on it together. So definitely they're into the collages, into the sticking and making sure that everything is okay. But especially my second daughter has really expressed interest in, Mommy, I really want to learn how to do this. I'm like, okay, fine. We're going to start holidays. I just wanted her to be a little bit older because she's still so full of life and beans. So I just want her to be a little bit more settled for me to feel comfortable. So, but definitely the collages, we're on it with our double-sided paper and our glue. We're in it, cutting and piecing. They absolutely love that.
Lovely. You got so many beautiful, bright colors to work with.
They do.
Is there a part of quilting that just does not work with African wax prints? Some technique or some shape that doesn't work well?
Honestly, if there is, I don't think we've discovered it yet. And we're really pushing ourselves to try as many techniques as possible. Paper piecing, applique, traditional piecing, we're really pushing ourselves. But I think it really holds well with cutting because of the weight. It holds well with stitching because of the weight as well. And I think that's why if you look at African fashions, Nigerian fashions that are made with the fabrics, they are so elaborate and so gorgeous just because it can hold its shape. It can be anything, literally anything you want it to be. But if you're talking in terms of the colors and the patterns, cutting them. So one of the challenges we had initially was, do we always have to fussy cut the African prints because the patterns are so big and then you feel so bad looking at a beautiful pattern and slashing it? But honestly, we've experimented with that and we found out that anyhow you cut it, it just fits in. You might want to give some thought to direction of fabric, and of course, follow the color theory, work with your values, but essentially, it's good to go. You can cut it any which way and it still turns out. Each piece holds its own. So far, no challenges. I don't think there's anything you cannot do. We're still working on it, trying to discover it, but so far, no.
Do you have a favorite quilt?
I think it has to be the first one. It has to be the first one because the first one was such a breaking of a barrier for me, such an entrance into a new world that I never imagined. And it was really a quilt of perseverance because I had no idea what I was doing. And so I worked on it for months. It was just a simple 9 patch with maybe about 9 blocks, but I labored over it. because for the first time I saw something that I really wanted that I couldn't do, and I didn't give up and I pushed through. And so not just for the quilt for itself, but what it leading me into Quilt Africa, leading me into this world of quilting, and just meeting people all over the world. It's just been amazing. I mean, we've interacted with customers from all the continents of the world, from in Asia, in America, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and I never would have, even Africa, I never would have imagined, that just pushing through to make that first quilt would open such a big door for me into a new world that has absolutely changed my life in every way.
So is it still on your bed?
It's still, yes, it's still in circulation. It's still in circulation. We fight over it between my kids and myself. So it's still, it's old, getting tattered now because it's in constant use, but it's still much in use.
So do all the kids have their own quilts?
They have their own quilts, which they have outgrown. So they have tasked me with, my quilt is too short for me. You have to make me another one. So I'm on it.
So if people went to your website, do you have some guidelines for just people in general to use African wax prints?
So on the website, well, the best thing to do really is to get into our Facebook group or to join our YouTube channel, because that is where the bulk of everything happens. And we encourage you to join any one of our free challenges. That's the point of the challenge. I say it's to help you learn the fabrics and to help you relearn yourself. Because when you come in contact with the fabrics, you have to let go of so many things that you've lived by as a quilter. So the point of the community, our Facebook group, where people share their works, so you can get inspired and then think to yourself and say, this looks good. The fabrics can actually work this way. I encourage the Facebook group. I encourage subscribing to our YouTube channel, because there we share the show and tells. The show and tells are amazing. Like the show and tell we had for this, we had a Seasons of Life challenge. We just completed about 2 weeks ago as well. It just blows my mind to see what the people do. And I tell you, I package the mystery bundles randomly. I am random. I'm totally and completely random, and I get so blown away when I see what people just work with, and they come out and and the way they talk about just the learning and overcoming fears, really. Please join the Facebook group, the YouTube channel. I think on our YouTube channel, we have clips of how to care for the fabrics. We also have some video courses where we take you through how to use color. It's so much, it's almost dizzy. How do you go from all to picking the ones that you need? We also have the mystery bundles, which come in colorway, because that's the first thing that I did when I, with the business. Oh my God, the colors are so overwhelming. I want to do this and I can't. So I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to group the colors in colorway so it's easier for you. So when you come for green, it's just green in different fabrics. And so you can work with that. So it was easier to digest, easier to work with, in colorways. So these are some of the easy ways that you can just drop into using the fabrics. I keep telling my people that you guys make me look so good, because I have the fabrics, but you have the gifts that you turn them into. I mean, there's just so much amazing talent. And I think for some of them, when they encounter the fabrics, it kind of unlocks something they never knew they had. We've had Georgia, for instance. She just started using the fabrics with us, and she's gone on to win so many medals and had her work exhibited. It just unlocked something, and then she just started gushing out so much creativity. So I'm really excited about just being a part of all of it. So thank you so much.
I find it fascinating how you can give 5 quilters the same fabric, sometimes even the same pattern, and
Yes.
how different they can be.
How different it is. How different it is. It's just amazing. For instance, the Southern Crescent Guild decided their challenge for the year would be the fabrics. And so they reached out to me and I put together bundles. And I'm telling you, I never would have imagined that people who had never used the fabrics would come up with something so exquisite. They went to town with it. So beautiful. It has really awakened in me an appreciation for my culture and for the fabrics. I grew up with these fabrics, you know, but when I see what quilters do with them, I'm like, wow, this is like treasure.
It must be exciting to unpackage new fabric.
Oh, you know, I mean, every time, for me, maybe I'm a little bit jaded. I've been doing this since I was a girl. I used to follow my mom to the markets, to the really interior Lagos markets that were so rough. For whatever reason, she would drag me along with her. And so I fell in love with it. The smell of cotton, fresh cotton just out of the mills, the wax, it stays with me. The sound of the ripping scissors as they're cutting through her fabrics, you know, all these memories, they stay with me. And so I fell in love with the fabrics at that time. But I guess I took it for granted. I'll just go to the market, see something I liked and just buy it and store it. I'm the perfect hoarder. Just having everyone else, you know, use the fabrics in a way that I'd never seen. And then they take videos and they say, my package has arrived. Oh, I'm so excited. And, you know, even fabrics that sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I could have done better with this. They manage to they love it and then they turn it into something so fantastic. So I'm in a good place.
Well, I
Really in a
like
good
that
place.
you've opened it up to guilds, because that's a wonderful way to get more people on board. To introduce it at a guild level, they're always looking for new challenges. And of
Yeah.
course, we're always looking for, just something different that they have never done before,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how it pushes different people. And of course, there's going to be people that are not comfortable moving into other cultures and that. But if they do it as a pack, it's a
Yes.
little bit easier for them, and it makes the world a smaller place when we all understand each other.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've had conversations about so much conversations because we've been through the Black Lives Matter, you know, so we've had to have those conversations. It's been a privilege for me to be a leading voice in my corner of the world, to say, look, I'm on this side of the world, you all are on the other side of the world, but I can tell you that we're all the same. When we gather around the fabrics and our quilting and our UFOs and all the things that we do, we're basically the same, you know. So it's been such an honor for me to lead the conversation and just watch how when we first started, everyone was on edge, and just to see how people come in and they relax. And it doesn't matter where they're from, they tell me, oh, Miriam, we just love our meetings. When we come together, everyone is listening, everyone is contributing, you know. So we've really had to have those difficult conversations of the cultural thing, the colonial thing. You know, I tell them my experiences of being from colonial Africa, colonized Africa. You know, they tell me their experiences of being in, you know, from slave trade and the civil rights and all of that. And we say, look, the first thing is you have to let it go and you have to keep moving forward in whatever way that you can. You know, you can't just keep holding onto the hurt. So that's one thing that we do. And so reaching out to the guilds, for me, because of what we do as a community, I see that the conversation, not just for the business, but the conversation gets better in the guilds. And so we're now having the Battle of the Guilds. This year, we're having a challenge for the guilds, Battle of the Guilds. And so we want to give them a pack of fabrics and say, as a guild, do this, and we're going to judge what you're doing. It just gives everyone the opportunity to start talking, you know, so important to just start talking. Members of the tribe are sharing their works in the library, in the community center, they're entering shows. I said, yes, you have to keep that conversation going. And you have to not slouch, make sure that you do a good job so that it's a conversation starter and it gives you an opportunity to express yourself in a non-confrontational way. That's so important. That's so important. And honestly, if it's not the color, if it's not the quilting, if it's not the colors of your quilts, if it's not the actual quilting, you always find common ground when it comes to creativity, when it comes to art, to talk, you know, to talk as without barriers. So that's what we're doing. That's last year I challenged them. You have to give a presentation. You have to enter a guild. You have to enter an exhibit. You have to enter a show, you know, a juried show if you feel up to it, but you have to exhibit something. And the ladies just went crazy. to their sororities, to their community centers, to their guilds. Everyone has their works and they're just talking about it. And it has made them feel confident in themselves, especially those of African heritage. They feel a little bit more confident, a little more able to put themselves out there and say, this is mine, this is something I identify with. And for everyone else, they're just having a ball. Oh my goodness, these colors, they're so, and then we share the stories of the culture and tradition. We do challenges and say, the other time we talked about courting and marriage in African culture, and so we talked about how fabrics play into that, and so we really, we have fun in our quiet little corner, and I'm just happy to see everyone relaxed. Even our block of the month meetings, everyone came in so stiff, and I'm like, it looks like I made a mistake starting this block of the month. But now everyone is, so what state are you in? Oh, I'm coming over next month. Okay, I'll hit you up. So they're taking photos, they're having fun. So it's really been a blessing for me. I'm so grateful. I've just found my spot.
I think people still have enough time to sign up for the Quilt Africa International Summit. How do they do that?
Absolutely. So the summit this year, like I mentioned, is July 11th to 13th. We've started off with our early bird tickets, and they're available on the website, www.quiltafricafabrics.com. There's a link there that will take you to the dedicated summit site. And so you can see all that we're offering. We're offering personal passes. And for the first time, we're doing something we've never done before. We're offering group passes to enable guilds, quilting friends, quilting groups to join and enjoy the summits as a group of people with shared interests. So they can talk about it, chat about it, work through the projects that will be made available. Yeah, so just go to the website and then you can click on the summit, learn more, and then you have all the information that you need.
Well, thank you so much, Miriam, for being on the show today. You are such a wealth of information. I'm sure a lot of people will be checking out your website because we've just learned so much.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Miriam Galadima-Benson. I know from people who have attended or taught at the summit in years before that it's full of great energy and instruction. If you want to know more about Quilt Africa Fabrics or the Quilt Africa Summit, I'll leave links to both in the video notes below. I'll also have links to the Facebook page, Instagram, and a contact email. Next time you're in your sewing room, be sure to have Karen's Quilt Circle playing in the background. I have interviewed so many amazing quilters on this show. Let one inspire you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.